Welcome back to the 8th and final video in this course where we talk through our complete process for making Ultimate Frisbee highlight videos. If you've made it this far, congratulations, we have covered a lot, and in this video we are summing it all up. Way back in the first video of this course, which was really just an introduction video, we talked about how my wife and I have been making highlight videos for a while and that this series is detailing our process for making those videos. But really there are no rules for this stuff, so you're welcome to take on board as much or as little of this as you want. This is just what works for us, and you are welcome to do things differently. The second video is where we really got started, and we talked about all of the different kit that we use to film our highlight videos. We use consumer DSLRs or mirrorless cameras, ideally ones that can film at a higher frame rate to capture slow motion highlights. To go with those cameras, we use a couple of different lenses. Firstly, and most importantly, we have a telephoto lens that lets us zoom in on the play. We also like to have a wider lens on hand for when we want to take the camera off the tripod and film handheld. Speaking of tripods, we also like to use big, sturdy tripods with a fluidized pan and tilt tripod head. That tripod head helps us film highlights well zoomed in without too much camera shake. Once we've packed our camera, our lenses, and our tripod, we need to make sure to throw in a lens hood to avoid lens flares, appropriate wet weather protection for our gear, and of course plenty of batteries and SD cards. The last thing that we talked about in the second video was smartphones and drones and how they might not be useful for filming the actual highlights, but footage from them can still have a place in a highlight video. In the third video, we talked about all of the different camera settings that we use to capture Ultimate Frisbee highlights. First, we talked about shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, all of which can brighten or darken your image, and also control something else about your image. Shutter speed controls the amount of motion blur in the image, aperture controls how blurry the background is, and ISO can add unwanted noise to the image. When we're setting up these settings, we like to keep the shutter speed at half of the frame rate because that gives a good amount of motion blur. We like to keep the aperture relatively high, generally above 8 to 10, because that makes it easier to keep the play in focus, and we adjust that higher as needed to keep the image well exposed. If we can't get the image bright enough by lowering the aperture, that's when we increase the ISO, but generally we try and keep that as low as possible to avoid noise in our image. When it comes to picture style, things like saturation, contrast, and sharpness, there are two ways that you can do things. You can set those settings to give you a good looking image straight out of the camera, or you can do what we do, which is to turn all of those settings down to capture a flat image and then adjust everything later while you're editing. That can give you more room to correct errors and get creative with colors, but it does take longer. Choosing the resolution and frame rate to film at is basically a balancing act because generally increasing one means decreasing the other. On our cameras we film at 1080p and 60 fps, but if your camera can spit out more pixels or more frames per second, you should definitely do that. The fourth video was all about pre-filming preparation. We can't just show up at the fields and start filming, we need to get permission first. As well as getting permission, there might be a few other things that you want to do. You probably need to review the schedule so that you know when to be there and where. If you can get a hold of the field layout, you can do some planning for where to set up so that you can film multiple fields at once and get as much footage as possible. When planning things out, you might also want to consider how some games might finish early and that there might be better highlights in tighter games, which generally means that you can get more highlights toward the end of a tournament. The other thing that we talked about in the fourth video was packing. We need to charge up all of our batteries, maybe clear our SD cards, and pack all of the camera gear that we need for the day. As well as the camera gear, we need to pack stuff to look after ourselves. Snacks, comfy shoes, and appropriate protection from the elements. The fifth video was all about filming Ultimate Frisbee to capture highlights. We talked about where to set up to capture highlights and how we might want to change where we set up based on a bunch of different things. We might want to film from the sideline so we're close to all points on the field, or we might want to film from the end zone to avoid crowded sidelines and get a clear view of the field. Sun, wind, and rain also might influence our decision of where to set up. If it's windy, some areas of the field might see more action than others, and if it's raining, it's often easier to film with the rain hitting our backs rather than hitting the lens. Once we've chosen where to film, we need to set up our tripod. We talked about how it's important to make sure that the tripod is level, and it's also a good idea to try and set up everything so that we're comfortable while we're filming. The next thing that we talked about in video 5 was actually filming Ultimate Frisbee. We're only interested in capturing footage of highlights, but to make sure that we're filming when the highlights happen, we need to film everything. We talked about tracking the disc as smoothly as possible and zooming in and out as appropriate. We talked about the importance of framing and how, when appropriate, we should leave empty space in the frame for people to throw into or jump into or lay out into. As well as highlights, there are lots of things that happen in and around an Ultimate game that are worth filming. In video 5, we also talked about filming things like spirit circles, team cheers, high fives, and all the other good stuff that we collectively refer to as B-roll. We talked about how you're probably going to want to take your camera off the tripod to shoot B-roll, and how it's a good chance to get creative. It's also important to be courteous while doing this because people are there to play Ultimate and the video is secondary to that. The last thing that we talked about in video 5 was filming in the rain. A waterproof shroud over your camera helps keep the camera dry, and so does an umbrella. If there's no shelter available, we like to shove the umbrella handle down our raincoats so that we have 2 hands free to operate the camera, which looks really silly, but it works. The 6th video was the first of 2 videos focused on the editing process. The first thing that we talked about in that video was the audience of our highlight videos and how through our videos we're putting Ultimate on show to a wider community. I also talked about how I personally think it's important for a highlight video to have some form of loose story, and the easiest way to achieve that is by picking a song and editing the video to match the contour of the song, essentially editing a kind of music video. With that in mind, we need to pick a song suitable for our video, and it's important to choose the song that we have the legal right to use, whether that's through paying to license the song or by choosing a song that the artist has made available for free. Most licenses that let us use songs also require us to give credit to the artist. When picking a song, it's also nice to pick a song that you like, since you'll be listening to it over and over and over again while you edit. The 7th video, the one before this one, was the second video about editing. We talked about how before we can start cutting clips together, we need to go through all of the footage that we gathered and extract the highlights. That means going through what is probably hours of footage, probably watching faster than real time, and cutting out anything cool that happens. As you find highlights, you're probably going to want to sort them in some way that makes the editing process easier. We sort all of our clips into 5 categories. 3 categories for highlights, going from the coolest to the not so cool, 1 category for clips of pulls, and the last category for everything else. After we've extracted all of the clips that we might want to put into our video, it's time to actually cut the video together. This means pulling in the song that we chose earlier and putting clips in to match the energy of that song. It's important to consider pacing when we do this, and also important to use all of the tools and techniques at our disposal, like timing events to line up with the song, using slow motion, including setups and payoffs, and other good stuff. In video 7, we also talked about how it's important to ensure our videos are equitable by including clips from all of the teams that we filmed, and if applicable, making our videos gender equitable as well. We talked about how this can be tricky at times, and that sometimes we need to be careful about the order of clips so that it doesn't feel like we're making our videos artificially equitable. And that brings us to video 8, which is this video, the last video of this course. If you've made it this far, congratulations, we have covered a lot. I've said this at the end of every video, and this video is no exception. In the description you'll find links to the supplementary resources for this course, which includes a bunch of useful resources, checklists, and other tools that I'm hoping will help you out. In the description there's also links to all of the other videos in the series in case you need a refresher on anything that we've covered. Hopefully this course has given you a good understanding of the way that we make our highlight videos, and I'm hoping that with that you're now equipped with everything you need to know to make your own highlight videos. Of course, just because we do something in a certain way doesn't mean that you have to. This is a creative endeavor and there's absolutely no right or wrong way of doing this. So by all means, take what we've covered in this course and put your own spin on it. I cannot wait to see what you create.